Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into Ephesians chapter 5.
Ooh, this is a good one. It's packed with advice on living a Christian life.
Yeah, you got themes like love, purity, wisdom, all that good stuff. But we're going deeper than just a surface level reading, right?
Absolutely. We're going to see how these ancient teachings can still apply to us today, even in our modern world. Plus, we'll be unpacking some pretty intense metaphors. Walking in light, becoming one flesh, buckle up.
I am buckled. Okay, so the chapter starts right off the bat telling us to walk in love as Christ also hath loved us.
Talk about setting a high bar.
Right. What does that even look like in real life? It can't just be about being nice to people, can it?
It's definitely more than just surface-level niceness. Walking in love is about making a conscious choice to act with love in every interaction we have. Think forgiveness, deep empathy, putting others' needs before your own, just like Christ did.
Okay, so it's love as an action, not just a feeling. Love is a verb.
I like that. Love is a verb.
But then the chapter kind of shifts gears, focusing on purity and avoiding unfruitful works of darkness. You know, it mentions things like fornication, uncleanness, covetousness. How does all that fit in with the whole walking in love idea?
It's important to remember the historical context,
Yes.
Social norms were way different back then. But if we look past those specific behaviors, the bigger principle here is about aligning our actions with our values, with the light of Christ.
So that's where the light and darkness metaphor comes into play.
Exactly. Light represents truth, goodness, spiritual growth. Darkness symbolizes the stuff that holds us back, the things that might seem tempting at first, but ultimately lead us away from a path of love and righteousness.
It's like that powerful line, "Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light." It's a call to wake up to our potential, shake off the stuff that's holding us back, and step into that light.
Yes, and it's not a one-time thing either. It's an ongoing process of growth, self-reflection, always striving to become better.
Which brings us to another big idea. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. Man, that feels so relevant today with all the distractions we face.
Right. Our time is precious. It's a gift. And this verse is like a reminder to be intentional about how we're using that gift. Are we making choices that align with our values and our goals? Or are we spending our time on things that truly matter?
It's easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and let time just slip away. This verse is a great reminder to step back and ask, am I making the most of this precious time I have?
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you have to become some sort of productivity machine or anything. It's more about figuring out what's truly important to you and making deliberate choices.
Mm.
Okay, so we've talked about walking in love, striving for purity, being mindful of our time, all super important stuff. But then there's this random little detail that pops up. Speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Music, where does that fit into everything?
Yeah, it seems kind of out of place, right? What's the big deal about music?
Well, music has always been a powerful force, especially in spiritual practices. Think about it. Music can bypass our logical thinking and tap right into our emotions. It helps us express things that words sometimes can't.
It's true. A certain song can instantly bring back a memory or make you feel a certain way. Music has this incredible power to move us.
And in this context, it's about using music to connect with something bigger than ourselves, to express our faith, to cultivate a spirit of joy and gratitude. Singing hymns, listening to uplifting music, it all contributes to that spiritual growth.
I'm curious, is there a certain type of music that helps you personally connect with something larger than yourself?
I find a lot of peace and inspiration in classical music, especially Bach. There's a complexity and a beauty there that just speaks to my soul. But honestly, even a simple folk song can move me and connect me to that sense of shared humanity.
I love that. So we've covered love, purity, time, and music. It's amazing how much wisdom is packed into this one chapter. But now we're coming to what might be the most complex and, frankly, potentially controversial part. The section on marriage.
Oh, yeah, this is where things get a bit tricky. The chapter uses the relationship between husband and wife as a metaphor for the relationship between Christ and the church. It's full of symbolism, but we need to approach these verses with a lot of care.
For sure. These verses have definitely sparked a lot of debate over the years. So let's tread carefully here. What does it actually mean for husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church, and for wives to submit to their husbands?
The key is to view it all through the lens of love and respect. That's the foundation of this whole chapter. When it talks about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church, it's pointing to a selfless love, a love that puts the other person first, a love that is willing to sacrifice. Think about it. Christ gave his life for the church. That's the ultimate example of love and service.
So it's not about control or one person being in charge. It's about putting your partner's needs on equal footing with your own.
Exactly. And just as Christ leads the church with love and compassion, husbands are called to lead their families in that same spirit. Now, the part about wives submitting to their husbands, that's where things can get misinterpreted. We have to acknowledge that this verse has been used to justify unhealthy power dynamics and even abuse, which is completely wrong.
We definitely need to see the whole picture here.
Absolutely. The overarching message of this chapter and the Bible in general is love. A love that is respectful, selfless, and helps people grow. Looking through that lens, submission in a marriage should be about mutual yielding, a partnership where both partners place the needs of the relationship above their individual wants.
So it's not about one person being superior. It's about working together, supporting each other, and making decisions as a team.
That's it. In a healthy marriage, both partners submit to each other in a way, putting the well-being of the relationship first.
And this is where that idea of becoming one flesh
Yeah.
comes in, right?
Yes. The chapter uses this beautiful imagery to describe how a husband and wife are no longer two separate individuals, but they become united, sharing a life and a purpose together. It's about that deep level of intimacy and connection that can exist in a marriage.
It really is a powerful image, but it does make you think.
It definitely does. And that's actually a perfect place to pick up in part 2 of our deep dive into Ephesians chapter 5. So that one flesh idea, it's deeply symbolic. It points to this incredible intimacy and connection that can happen in a marriage. But like we were saying, it's not always simple, especially when we look at relationships today.
You're right. I mean, what about divorce? If two people are supposed to become this one flesh, how does that work when marriages don't last?
That's a question people have been debating for centuries. Some interpretations say the marriage bond is permanent no matter what. Others suggest that one flesh is more about the ideal of unity and closeness that marriage represents, not a literal, unbreakable thing.
So maybe it's more about the intention, the commitment to strive for that unity, even if you don't always perfectly achieve it.
Exactly. Plus, we have to think about the time when this was written. Divorce was way less common back then. Today, we understand relationships change, and sometimes splitting up is actually the healthiest thing.
That makes sense. But even beyond divorce, the whole one flesh thing might feel outdated to some. It seems to assume a very traditional heterosexual view of marriage. It doesn't really consider all the different ways people experience love and commitment nowadays.
You've hit on a really important point. The Bible was written in a very specific cultural context, reflecting the norms of that time. We have to approach it with a critical and open mind. We can appreciate the beauty of the one flesh metaphor, while also acknowledging that love and commitment can exist in so many forms, regardless of gender or whether people are officially married.
So how do we bridge that gap
Yeah.
between these ancient teachings and the realities of relationships today? How can we take these timeless ideas and make them relevant for us now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's about recognizing that the Bible isn't just some rigid rule book. It's a living document that can speak to us across time and cultures. We have to engage with it thoughtfully, wrestle with the difficult parts, and try to understand the deeper principles behind the words.
So it's less about taking everything literally and more about finding those core values that can help us build healthy, loving relationships of all kinds.
Exactly. If we strip away the cultural specifics and focus on the essence of the message, we see that Ephesians 5 is ultimately about love, a love that is selfless, pure, and seeks the well-being of the other person.
And that's something everyone can connect with no matter who they are or what they believe.
Absolutely. Romantic relationships, friendships, even the relationship we have with ourselves. Those principles of love, respect, putting each other first, those are essential.
Okay, so we've talked about walking in love, making the most of our time, the power of music, the complexities of marriage, and the one flesh metaphor. But before we wrap up our deep dive into Ephesians chapter 5, there's one more piece to explore. The idea of marriage as a representation of Christ and the church.
Whoa, yeah, this is a big one. It's probably the most profound and challenging metaphor in this whole chapter. It makes us think about the nature of our spiritual connection, our relationship with the divine.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. Can you break it down for us? What does it actually mean to compare human marriage to the relationship between Christ and the church?
Well, first things first. This metaphor isn't meant to be taken literally. It's symbolic, designed to help us grasp some deeper truths about God's love and our place in the grand scheme of things.
So it's not saying God is literally married to the church in a human sense.
Nope, not at all. It's about using the language and imagery of marriage to help us understand something much bigger and more mysterious.
Gotcha. So what is it illustrating? What are the main takeaways?
One of the big themes is the idea of Christ as the bridegroom and the church as his bride. Just like a groom cherishes and provides for his bride, Christ loves and cares for the church, his people.
So it's emphasizing God's unconditional love for us, even when we mess up and aren't perfect.
Precisely. It even talks about how Christ sacrificed himself for the church, just as a husband might sacrifice for his wife. This shows just how deep God's love is, his desire for a close, intimate relationship with each of us.
Wow, that's a powerful image. But what about when it talks about the church submitting to Christ? Doesn't that reinforce the idea of hierarchy and control? And isn't that a bit problematic?
It's really important how we understand submission in this context. It's not about blind obedience or giving up your own will. It's about willingly surrendering to something greater than yourself, trusting in God's wisdom and guidance.
So it's more about aligning yourself with God's will, trying to live in a way that honors him.
Yes, it's not passive, it's an active choice to engage with your faith and strive to live according to God's teachings.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So the marriage metaphor highlights God's deep love for us, our commitment to him, and how we try to live in a way that reflects that relationship.
Exactly. It's a beautiful image and definitely complex. But it's worth noting that some people find this metaphor a bit challenging, especially today when ideas about traditional gender roles and power dynamics are changing.
Right. It's a good reminder to be open-minded and consider different perspectives.
For sure, context is everything. The Bible was written in a different time, a different world. We can still learn from it without taking every detail literally.
I hear you. Okay, we've covered some pretty deep topics. Love, purity, using our time wisely, the symbolism of marriage. But I want to make sure we connect all this back to our listeners' life. What's the takeaway message? How can we apply these ancient teachings to our lives today, even if we don't necessarily share the same religious beliefs?
That's a great question, and I think it comes down to this. Ephesians chapter 5, at its heart, is about the power of love. It shows how love can change us, both in our relationships with other people and in our connection with the divine, whatever that means for each of us.
So it's not about blindly following rules, but about bringing that spirit of love into everything we do.
Exactly. Whether it's with loved ones, in our passions, or just going about our day, we can choose to express the kind of love that Christ demonstrated. Little acts of kindness, forgiveness, empathy, those are all expressions of that love.
That reminds me of redeeming the time. It's not just about productivity. It's about using our time to make a positive impact, to bring more love into the world.
I love that. It's about recognizing our time is valuable and spending it in a way that strengthens our relationships, fulfills our purpose, and deepens our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
This has been such a great conversation, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But before we go, I have one last question for you.
Hit me with it.
We've talked about walking in love, aiming for purity, making good choices, the power of metaphors. If you had to boil down Ephesians chapter 5 to one essential piece of advice, what would it be?
Ooh, that's tough. But if I had to choose, it would be this. Let love be your guide. In your decisions, your interactions, in every part of your life, let love be the compass that points you toward truth, goodness, and a deeper connection with whatever you consider sacred or divine.
Let love be your guide. I love that. It's so simple but so powerful. And it really ties together everything we've been talking about. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Ephesians chapter 5, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Ooh, I like where this is going. What you got?
We've been looking at this chapter as guidance for Christians, right? But I feel like there's something here for everyone. The ideas of love, purity, wisdom, intentional living, those are universal principles. Anyone can apply those to their life, no matter their beliefs.
You're so right. It's like this chapter is saying, hey, wake up. You have this incredible potential inside you. Let go of the things that are holding you back and step into a life full of love, compassion, and purpose. That's a journey we can all take together.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we don't have to go alone. We're meant to support each other, help each other grow, and walk this path together.
We're all connected, part of something much bigger than ourselves. And even our smallest actions can create ripples that spread out and touch the lives of others.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this challenge. How can you let love be your guide today? In your relationships, in your choices, in your work, your passions? How can you bring more love, kindness, and intentionality into everything you do?
And as you think about that, remember that even the tiniest act of love can make a world of difference. A kind word, offering a helping hand, really listening to someone who needs it. Those things might seem small, but they can truly brighten someone's day. And who knows, maybe that kindness will ripple outward and create a chain reaction of positivity.
I love that. This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like we could talk about this chapter for hours. But for now, we have to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ephesians chapter 5. And until next time, may you walk in love, make the most of your time, and let your life